Alexander, do you think that President Putin's been fairly moot on this issue until now? This week he rejected the notion of cutting off oil to the north, but is he going to stand with Beijing?
Well, first of all, I think that the Kremlin doesn't want North Korea to become desperate. I think that we should all remember the lessons of history and remember that Japan attacked America because exactly the same measures were put against Japan, also energy. So you can't really box in a regime like that, like the North Korean one, and expect it to do nothing about it. And don't also forget the fact that once you put more pressure on North Korea, the regime actually benefits from it. This is what Americans don't understand. They think that sanctions will push the people to get rid of their rulers. It doesn't work like this. It didn't work with Saddam. It doesn't work anywhere. It actually leads to the regime in a specific country becoming stronger, especially in North Korea, where the people are very proud of their country and they don't like any foreign interference. And they still, remember from history what the Americans did to North Korea in the 1950s. So I think it's a very wrong route to take. I think sanctions don't work. They will not work. They will only embolden the regime in Pyongyang. And I think the only way is, just like Putin said, is to talk, but talk in a constructive way and do really something. Until American troops are present in such numbers and with such might on the South Korean soil, you can't really expect North Korea not to pay any attention to that.
Lester, do you accept that notion that Americans don't truly understand what the mindset in the North is, and that imposing sanctions and more sanctions is only going to, alienate them even more? I mean, do you accept that from Pyongyang's point of view, they look out and they see what happened in Iraq, they see what happened in Afghanistan, they see what happened in Libya, and from their perspective, an independent nuclear deterrent is there to stop that happening to them?
Look, you can, Alexander makes some interesting points, except there's no way out under his scenario. Yes, economic sanctions are a fraught tool. They're not perfect. They have many flaws. However, the notion that what you really need to do is sit down and talk constructively, of course, is true, but that doesn't actually mean anything in this case. Pressure must be applied to North Korea. Frankly, I doubt that the public opinion of the man on the street in North Korea is all that significant in this current structure. And in terms of stepping back a little bit and thinking of in terms of examples of other situations like this, South Africa had a genuine change in government and moved towards a majority government. They gave up their nuclear deterrent peacefully. There are ways out here. And a part of the reason South Africa changed its regime was because of economic sanctions. So while there are, yes, of course, examples where this doesn't work, there are examples where it does work.
Okay, and Karl, very briefly, if you would, because we're already coming to halfway through the program, but would you expect there to be senior, top-level, behind-the-scenes negotiations going on that we in the media don't really know about?
I would expect that there are. Those are something that have been ongoing, in fact, for several years. We see secret flights at times in and out of Pyongyang, often originating in Guam, carrying senior U.S. officials. And in fact, that's what led to the Leap Day deal on February 29th a few years ago. Of course, a deal was struck, and then almost immediately North Korea turned around and launched another missile, therefore abrogating the deal. So when we're going to talk about sitting down to negotiate constructively, there needs to be trust between the partners, and North Korea right now has very little from the United States.
Okay, Karl, I appreciate your brevity. Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Hurricane Irma and climate change. So please stay with us on The Heat.
The world's currencies are more connected than ever before. The mechanisms that drive the economy are universal. Money moves markets. We explain these trends and show you how the cash in your pocket can have a wide-reaching effect. Because money makes the world go round. Global business.
a land full of natural resources and ingenuity, where millions are embracing a vibrant middle class. Divided by politics, but united by hope. Latin America is changing rapidly. Witness the change on America's Now.
Welcome back to The Heat. I'm John Terrett, filling in for Anand Naidu, who's back with you next week, by the way. Let's turn now to the massive hurricane, which is ripping through the Caribbean as it heads for the US. And as we continue to see extreme weather patterns across the globe, all of us have to see an impact on the response to climate change. And let's discuss that response so far. With me in the studio is Lester Munson, and my other guests include Qinduo Xu, who's in Beijing, Alexander Nekrassov, who's in London, and Karl Friedhoff, who is in Chicago. Qinduo Xu, to you first of all. The Paris Climate Agreement brought together China and the United States. Everyone was incredibly excited by that. Now Mr. Trump has rowed back from that. Do you think the fact that we have really 4 big hurricanes affecting the United States region in pretty much a week is going to put more pressure on President Trump to change his mind on climate change?
Well, I think at least it gives us more like a justification to call for more efforts, international efforts, to fight climate change, to implement the Paris Agreement. In the recently concluded BRICS summit in Xiamen in southern China, President Xi mentioned that the implementation of Paris Agreement has met some resistance. Some countries are becoming more inward-looking and are reluctant to join this global, cooperation, development cooperation in the fight against the development problem, global problems. Obviously, he referred to Mr. Trump and his government here. But hopefully, the whole process of withdrawing from the Paris Agreement will be, could last for 4 years. Hopefully, during this next 4 years, something will change, and the U.S. will, will be still in and join the rest of the world to fight the global, climate change here.
Lester, I don't know whether you're aware, but the rest of the world really, really wants America to come back into the Paris Climate Accord. And of course, Mr. Trump is showing no signs of doing that at all. I mean, let's just look at, we had Hurricane Harvey slamming into Texas pretty much a week ago. There's Hurricane Katia going into Mexico as we speak. Hurricane Irma is going to take on the entire peninsula of Florida. And then there's Jose right behind her. Is that not enough to make the president at least think twice about climate change, do you think?
So these storms are terrible, and they're having a real impact on people's lives, and we shouldn't make light of them. And I would never intend to do that. And the response should be robust. But I think to immediately jump to climate change because a series of big storms came through is as much of a mistake as saying climate change is not a problem when you don't have hurricanes for 5 years, as I believe we went through before Harvey showed up. So I think I would hesitate to overreact to what's going on. Is climate change an issue? Of course it is. How should the U.S. government handle it, I think, is a separate question. There are economic trade-offs. President Trump, for whatever his other issues, recognizes that the voters care about exactly how you do respond to climate change. Do you throw jobs away unnecessarily, or do you try to have a calibrated approach to something that is a challenge? I think he's in the calibrated approach category, which frankly I think is sensible, and I don't know that these series of storms are really going to change the political dynamic for him all that much.
I mean, Karl, that's the point, isn't it? In America right now, it's all about jobs. It's not about climate change. That is why President Trump was elected. And also, doesn't Lester make a very good point that although we've had a terrible season for hurricanes this year, for the last 5 years or so, there really haven't been too many of them around.
Yeah, you're right that it is all about jobs in this case. But I would go on to point out that we here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, one thing we do is a pretty healthy public opinion polling each year. And we've asked questions on the Paris Agreement, and there's pretty broad support. In fact, I think almost 2/3 of Americans, including majorities of Democrats and Republicans, think that the United States should continue to participate in the Paris Agreement. So if Mr. Trump were to decide that he wanted to rejoin that agreement, there would be broad public support, and it wouldn't really pose that much political trouble for him in terms of the American public.
Alexander, where do the Russians stand on climate change? I know that you're part of the Paris Agreement, but President Putin didn't exactly lambast President Trump, I don't think he did anyway, when Trump pulled America out of the agreement. So what is the Russian position on climate change?
Well, first of all, in Russia, there are, as anywhere else, there are skeptics and there are fans of this idea. The problem is that there is a word play here. Now, we're talking about climate change, and then we add man-made climate change. I think that's the talk that usually is done by the green lobby. Now, I don't think there is man-made climate change myself, simply because we mix pollution and with the influence on the climate. The climate changes itself a lot because the system, the whole Earth, the planet, has this system of rejuvenating itself, you know, changing all the time. And for example, for me personally, to be hearing that these hurricanes are a result of man activity is just naive, because hurricanes will come even if we become absolutely clean, with clean energy, they will still be there around. So I think it's very important to understand what we are actually talking about. For example, until very recently, we were talking about global warming. Suddenly, this global warming, sort of talking about global warming, sort of disappeared. Why? Because the Earth is cooling. So now it's climate change instead of global warming. And I think we really need to understand, you know, the basic problems that we have. Now, one of the problems that Russia understands is that consumer society will always pollute. The whole point of the consumer-oriented economy is to produce more goods and to impose those goods on consumers. Otherwise, it doesn't grow. So how do you actually cope with this? Do you change the economy? I think we need to look at the basics.
Qinduo Xu in Beijing, finally, what about that point? Over here, the TV coverage at the moment suggests that this is happening because the Atlantic is warming, but the evidence is not 100% in place, is it? There are scientists who argue against climate change. To Alexander's point, is it becoming a bit of a popular thing to believe in?
Well, Alexander and John, this is not the problem. You know, even man on the streets, they don't see the direct connection with the hurricane, with the climate change. Well, it doesn't. You know, it's not a problem, and we can still go ahead and to produce like a green energy and clean energy, and to make our environment cleaner and more healthier. What's wrong with that? I think for this point, I think at least in China, you would see, people are quite, unifying in this point. That is, we should do more. We should protect our environment. We should produce and rely more on the clean energy instead of the fossil energy. So I think ultimately this is a good thing. And I think on this point, probably, people do agree. Instead of, yes, probably there are divisions in understanding, what are the real causes of climate change, or what are the real causes of hurricane. But that's not a problem. We can still go ahead with the Paris Agreement and to reduce emission.
All right, well, we'll leave it there, all of you. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. It's very good to have your contributions. We appreciate it. Qinduo, Lester, Alexander, and Karl.